I'm not embarrassed enough to tell you that I love the television series or movies Sharknado. So I do. I like them. They're just out of control. Anyway, there's this, I think the last one, the hero who defeats all the sharks and the tornadoes, he is getting to rappel down this big hole, I don't know, to do something crazy. Anyway, and the woman who he's hooking up to rappel asks him, he says, have you ever done this before? And the hero, looks at it and goes, lady, I've done everything before. Which, if you've seen Sharknado, is true, right? He's done everything before. So, I mean, how do you introduce Jim Greer? Well, he's somebody who's done everything before. And, like I just introduced earlier, I love people, when you just kind of get to know them, you just realize that, just over time, what a badass they are. When I first met Jim Greer, it was just kind of like that. So, as you know, you probably don't know this, I'm a big John Boyd fan. He didn't like to be told what to do. Surprise. Now, he kind of did his thing his own way. I loved he was an American military theorist. I love that. They have the Karl Clausewitzes and the Liddell Harts. He's an American. I loved it. I loved his audacity. I loved how everyone told him no. I loved his passion for something, the purpose-filled life, and a lot of things. And I loved his theory, and I liked how he wanted to win at all costs. And all these things, when I started reading about him, just really endeared me to who he is and what he was about. So as last year where I was at, Jim Greer comes in and he's like, hey, we're going to teach our students maneuver warfare. And I was like, what? Who are you? And so of course, we go out to eat dinner, and I'm talking, let me tell you about maneuver warfare or whatever. And Jim Greer, mentions, oh yeah, John Boyd taught me tactics at the maneuver tactics school. Now, you know how dumb you feel at that moment, all right? And so, as we taught together, I have all these green books, like this, and I filled up probably 3 green books of what Dr. Greer had to say with my students. I mean, to this day, there's people you meet in your life that they're just transformative. And not only just what he teaches, but who he is. And he's the same type of caliber, right? He's always about wanting to win. He's always about everybody else. And so I'm not trying to, embarrass him or nothing, but I just want to tell you that I'm honored that you took the time to come here. And so, Jim Greer's done just about everything. He's commanded brigades in combat. He's commanded, he was in the first Gulf War, right? He's commanded brigades. I could go on and on and on. So I'm going to stop talking and allow Jim Greer a maximum amount of time, but I really want to tell you thanks for being here. Thanks for all you do. Thanks for what you've done for me and this organization. Help us to learn to fight, outnumbered, and win. So folks, with that, Dr. Jim Greer.
So I'm an armor officer, and the whole day I've been sitting there thinking that this is the closest I'm ever going to get to being Patton. And, just this thing right here. And I thought I would start off with the opening speech of the movie, but I couldn't do George C. Scott justice, so I'm not even going to try. Just by way of background, real quick, or setup, I guess. The Russian special military operations started on the 24th of February in 2022. And so the next day on the 25th, we carved out of our SAMS course a team and set them up that we called the Russia-Ukraine Study Group, and started learning from the war. And so for almost the last 3 years now, we've been learning from the war. We've been supporting the war by bringing teams of students over and supporting the Ukrainians, et cetera. And I've learned an immense amount from that. And so this is really divided up into kind of two pieces. Piece number one is what I've learned from it, what I'm observing. And then piece number two is, I think, what some of the implications are with a maneuver warfare flavor to it. So I'm going to go ahead and punch through this as rapidly as I can. The first thing I would say is that, and we know all warfare is mental, moral, physical. And what's playing out in Ukraine illustrates that every single day. And one of the things that I would say that the Ukrainians excel at is going after the moral side of the war. Napoleon said the moral is to the physical as 3 is to 1. And so when they're planning an operation and executing an operation, how they are going to get at that moral side of it, how they're going to use social media messaging, how they're going to use everything they have in their toolkit to go after the will of their enemy is built into the plan. It's not an afterthought, it's built into the plan. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing is that everyone recognizes that there's this transparent battlefield with all of these ubiquitous sensors and shooters. And the challenge is, okay, what does that mean? How do we adapt to that? And so one of the things, if you look in the upper left-hand corner there, is what Boyd would call fast transients. How do you move through the space as rapidly as possible? So people look at the Russians on motorcycles and they say, boy, that's stupid. But what they're trying to do is move through the dead ground as fast as they can. And actually, one of the advantages that strikers have is the ability to move through the dead ground as rapidly as possible, which is one of the reasons, not the only reason, that the Ukrainians absolutely love the Striker. And so then the reason they've gone to FPV drones that are racing drones is even the drone has to move through the dead ground as fast as possible. So then the second thing is sometimes you end up with this no man's land. Wet gap crossings is a really good example. If you try to do a wet gap crossing, you're pretty much just going to be dead because it slows you down. You're in this space that is so lethal. And so what you end up with is the sides looking at each other across the river and nobody wants to make the first move. Then there's the idea that this is so cluttered that you can hide in plain sight. So one of the things that on both sides that they've done with their CPs is, one, they've made them smaller and they dispersed them, but they hide them in plain sight. Their battalion CP guys are all in civilian clothes. They don't even put uniforms on. They're in civilian clothes. They're in civilian cars. They're moving from place to place. They're on the third floor of some apartment building, in downtown, wherever. And so hiding in plain sight is one of these reactions. And then you end up with also the empty battle space. And a great example of this is the Black Sea. The Russians start out, they've got a Black Sea fleet, they've got all this capability, they're doing all this stuff. They've been completely driven out of it. And so now it's just this giant empty space. And every once in a while, the Ukrainians will go in there with their unmanned surface vehicles, vessels, and they'll do some stuff. But other than that, it's pretty much just empty. So these are different reactions to this transparent battle space. You can't ignore it. You have to figure out, okay, how are we going to fight and survive in it? All right. So this is, to me, probably one of the biggest impacts of what's going on right now. If you look at the left-hand corner, our army, which is in many ways still a Desert Storm army, is built around the direct fire lethal space, which is really about 4 kilometers out. That's how far you can shoot with most of our weapon systems, TOWs, main guns, all the rest of that stuff. And then beyond that is, we think of as being relatively secure and safe. That is not the case anymore. Right now, the dead space, the space you have to cover to get to where you want to go, is about 25 to 30 kilometers. And in there is a direct fire space. And let me emphasize that. An FPV is a direct fire weapon. It is not an indirect fire weapon. There is a guy or gal who is guiding it all the way until it hits. And it's not indirect, like fire it and hope it hits whatever it's going to hit. It is a direct fire weapon. Electronic warfare is a direct fire weapon. So you've got this dead space that's now that deep that you have to cross. And that has changed tactics incredibly. And that's why you see a lot of the reaction that you see now. So let me continue on here. What's the impact of that? The impact of that is that it takes all arms maneuver, combined arms maneuver, plus other stuff. If you want to survive in the dead space, if you want to cross the dead space to get to your objective, it takes electronic warfare, it takes drones, it takes counter drones, it takes cyber, and tactical cyber is a thing. It takes ISR, it takes artillery. All of those things. Infantry and armor, again, I'm armor, many of you all are infantry, they're important, they're not that important. You win or lose with those capabilities right there. If you don't have those capabilities, you're just dead men walking. Air has changed a lot, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. One of the things that I would say that applies to this lethality is that the Russians have gone in the airspace to using glide bombs. Probably many of you have heard of those. Their glide bombs are increasingly accurate, so that's just another way to make that space deeper and more lethal. But part of the changing character of war, it's actually a return to, I would say, almost to the Cold War in terms of these enablers are so critical to the fight. And if you think about, now your brigade's a little bit more robust than many, but if you think about your basic average brigade, not a striker brigade, but average one that's just 2 infantry or 3 combined arms battalions, and then whatever else we task organize into it, they don't have a lot of those capabilities. That's extremely important. And the one I left off of here is engineers, because in order to survive, you have to dig in the moment you stop, or you have to stop in a building and then immediately reinforce that building so that it's survivable. You know, one of the things that, if you think about all of the old World War II movies that you ever see, the command post is always in the basement. You know, I always watch that, you know, and then all of a sudden, I watch the Ukraine war and I go, I get it, okay? Because it's so lethal, the only place to survive is underground. So these brigades, the moment they stop, they go underground. They either dig the hole or they find a hole that they reinforce, et cetera. And so engineers become really, really important. Okay, so what's some of the impact of this? And this is one of the impacts. And we have to think of the battlefield framework differently. Because the way we think of it is there's this close battle area that's very, very lethal. Then there's a deep battle area where we use the occasional stuff, maybe some of our long-range fires, our HIMARS or something like that, or the occasional attack helicopter that goes a little bit deep and goes shoot at some stuff. And then there's the rear area, which is largely protected except for a little bit of stuff that might filter through, et cetera. That's not the way it is anymore. Because there are so many UASs, because there's so much electronic warfare, because there are so many long-range shooters in terms of MLRS or MRLs for them, that deep operations are not episodic, they are continuous. Continuous out to that 30, 40, 50, 60 kilometer range, which means that in our rear area, it's no longer safe. There's no like safe space that you say, okay, well that's the battalion field trains, and so it's back there 15 kilometers, and those guys are okay. It doesn't work that way. They are just as susceptible to being attacked at a moment's notice as anybody else. So the rear area is actually a rear battle area. That's the way it is today. And the deep area is a deep battle area. And so that battle is continuous across the battlefield framework, which is, again, not the way that we think about it, nor is it the way our doctrine is. Okay, so the next thing is, let me back up for just 1 second because I didn't put the slide in here. But now if you think about that battlefield framework, we think about as we're moving towards the FLOT, our assembly area is normally out of indirect fire range. And then our attack position is going to be that last covered and concealed position before we go into the attack. Well, guess what? Out of indirect fire range is like, 100 kilometers back. And that last covered and concealed position is 25 kilometers from the FLOT. So it's not the 4 kilometers from the FLOT like we used to think of it, it's way back there. And so the battlefield framework has been elongated. And we have to figure out how to deal with that. So next thing is the primacy of electronic warfare. Because of all these systems, the primary way to kill UAS and drones is electronic warfare. The primary way to counter PNT-guided weapons, GPS-guided weapons, is electronic warfare. Who has lots of GPS-guided weapons? Us, like basically everything we have that's not a tank or a M4. The primary way to counter C4ISR is electronic warfare. And so how many electronic warfare systems are in your brigade? Do you have a Prophet platoon? Okay, right, which you have how many systems, 2? 3? And those are electronic support, right? Not electronic attack? Yeah, exactly. So a Russian brigade has about 40 electronic warfare systems that are either electronic attack. In addition, it has on almost every vehicle and almost every squad a little mini counter GPS or counter UAS jammer that's relatively short range. It's probably got a range of 30 to 50 meters, but that's enough to make a FPV or a quadcopter miss or crash, whichever. So electronic warfare is how you protect yourself so that you can move from one place to another. And it is also, again, the Russians' biggest overmatch for us, because all of our, we gave them, I don't know how many Excalibur 155 rounds, but it was a lot. They don't use them because GPS. GPS throws off HIMARS, GPS throws off ATACMS, GPS throws off laser-guided bombs, et cetera. So again, it's not 100% like foolproof against it, but it's a significant threat to most of our capabilities. So you got to win the electronic warfare fight in order to be able to do the things that you would like to be able to do. So next is CPs. I think everybody knows how vulnerable CPs are. The Ukrainians have this drill down, find it, fill it, find it, kill it. I mean, they're masters at it. The Russians are pretty good at it too. So everybody has gone to all these different ways to make their CPs survivable, and I know y'all are working through that. And I'm going through this quickly so I can get to the main effort here. John Antal talked about the air littoral. This is kind of the airspace geometry in that space from the about 6,000 feet AGL and below is just filled with UASs. This year, John was a little low. In 2024, the Ukrainians made about 1.4 million UASs, which across an 800-kilometer front means that every minute of every day, there was 5 UASs over every kilometer of front to a depth of about 15 kilometers. They're there all the time. It is a 24/7 fight, no matter where you are. Now think about, are we prepared to do a 24/7 counter UAS fight, UAS and counter UAS fight? And it is a significant problem. So let me go into the next thing. So this is how it plays out. This is a company, I apologize, these are Bradleys, they're not Strikers, my bad. But I just ran out of time to change it. But if you're your basic average company commander, you're doing everything with UASs that the Joint Force Air Component Commander does with his 200 or so fixed-wing aircraft. You are doing offensive counter-air. That means you're going out and you're killing the controllers for enemy UASs. You're doing defensive counter-air, whether that's counter-UAS electronic warfare or your own UASs that you ram other UASs with. You're doing close air support, where you're going out and you're hitting stuff as you're assaulting. You have to do air battle management. You've got all of these aircraft running around and everything else. So you have to control that, the same way that the JFAC does or somebody else. Obviously, you're using them for ISR to go find. You're using them for strike to go hit something deep. You're using them for interdiction. You take it out, it's got a mine on it, you drop it down on a road, blow the mine off, then somebody can't get in. And you're using it for logistics. Because this area is so lethal, a lot of their logistics that they bring forward, ammo, food, water, is done with UASs because it's a lot safer than putting two guys in a truck and driving the truck forward. So all of that is going on. You're fighting an air war at the company level, which means you're also fighting at the battalion level, brigade level, et cetera. And that's not just infantry and armor companies, that's every company, because everybody has components of this. All right, next, what all this starts to bring forward is because the area is so lethal and you can be seen so easily, is that protection becomes the most important warfighting function. It's more important than maneuver. It's more important than fires. If you cannot protect yourself, if you cannot survive, you can't do anything else. So that means you have to build this little bubble around you that protects you so you can maneuver from one place to another. So you look at it, and if you're watching what's going on in Ukraine, a lot of times you think, well, this war is like watching paint dry. They're only attacking 500 meters or so. Well, the reason is because it takes a brigade's worth of assets to protect one company so it can attack 500 meters. That's how much protection you need. Otherwise, the company just gets wiped out. So if you think about the way we normally think of a brigade attack, 2 battalions up, 1 battalion in reserve, ready to follow and support or whatever, and then a little bit of artillery and stuff supporting it. Theirs is flipped all the way around. It's 8 companies supporting 1 company, along with as much electronic warfare and fires and everything else as you can get in there. So protection is the warfighting function that you cannot fail at. Otherwise, you will not survive and you will not be able to maneuver. Okay, so you add all this together, and what you end up with is lethality and stagnation. Just massive losses on both sides, very difficult to do any sort of mounted maneuver. And so, that's where we are. Except roll into Kursk. Okay, so I think pretty much everybody knows on the 6th of August of last year, the Ukrainians attacked into Kursk, and in a week, they secured 1,000 square kilometers, which is the same that it took the Russians, with the kind of methodical approach that they had been using, about 4 months to take across multiple different fronts. So why were they able to do that? So the first thing is mission command and organic command and control, and I'll talk more about that. The second was novelty. It was completely unexpected for them to attack into Russia itself. Then the characteristics that Boyd suggests are necessary for maneuver warfare, and that's harmony, variety, rapidity, and initiative, and I'll talk more about those. Surprise and deception. Then again, the fast transient maneuvers, how do you get through the dead zone as rapidly as possible? And then how do you generate what are called non-cooperative centers of gravity? How do you get the enemy to work against themselves? And so they did this, again, with 8 brigades, which are actually kind of battalion size. They're brigades, but their brigades have taken a lot of losses, et cetera. What did they lead with? They led with 2 striker brigades, okay? So, high five to the striker guys. They wouldn't have picked them if they weren't the right system for what they were trying to do. So let's talk about the Kursk fight. All right, so the prep and the shaping that went into it. First, messaging, okay? The Ukrainians, from the president all the way down, were messaging, hey, we're worried about the Russians attacking us in Sumy, which is right below the bubble down there at the bottom on the Ukrainian side. We're worried about it, worried about it, worried about it. So it made it sound like that they were defending. which also let them kind of leach in little small elements, saying that they were sending them there to try to defend. So they had that whole deception thing going on. Then they used special forces to be able to find the surfaces and the gaps to recon. So they did that. The next thing they did was they blinded the enemy. So counter ISR and counter UAS. So the counter UAS they had developed a system to be able to ram a UAS with another one in the air, and they'd practiced it and they'd gotten it down. Because the medium-sized Russian UASs, the Orlans, the Supercams, and the Zalas, are the ones that can kind of go about 40 to 60 kilometers deep, and they're the ones that have the target recognition, the ability to laze for targets. So they're the ones that are tied back to the artillery. So you want to take those things out to blind the enemy and take away his fires. So that's what they did over a period of time, about a week leading up to it, without making a big deal about it. They just started ramming all these things and taking them out as much as they could. The next thing they did was they did a cyber attack into Kursk. And so the reason they did a cyber attack is that on both sides, everybody uses fixed fiber optics for command and control comms. They just plug into the local systems and ride their stuff across it. So if you do a cyber attack at somebody, what happens? All those systems get shut down. So then they can't talk to each other, to themselves. And so it took that out. And then they did more or less a hip shoot or a raid with a Patriot, brought it forward and shot at the Russian aircraft that do these normal GBUs attacks, because normally they're outside the range of the Patriots. But if you bring the Patriot forward, now it's inside the range, and when you hit them, it's going to freeze them for a week or so. Back to Bob's idea of a time flank. You buy yourself this time that the enemy's not going to do something during that time. And so all of this was done to shape. And then the other genius thing was that the General Sursky, who's the overall commander, basically didn't tell anybody what they were going to do until about 2 days out. He was doing all this stuff without telling anybody. And then they finally told the units, you're going to move and this is what you're going to do, which of course is security, because if you don't know what you're doing, you can't give it away. So all of this was the prep and shaping piece of it. And it was designed to blind the enemy and get inside their OODA loop there. So then the next thing was the actual attacks. So at some point you got to do a breach, and they had been practicing these breaches, and they picked this area. We talk in maneuver warfare, one of the three big things is surfaces and gaps. So they found the gaps where the obstacles were the weakest and where they could breach the best. So those are the gaps that they found. So they pushed these two brigades through these gaps, and then they immediately fan out. What else do? They use jamming to jam the local comms to take away the C2. They even pushed their jammers forward right up in the very front with the strikers to be able to build that bubble around now on the Russian side where they've got all that jamming going on. The next thing they did was HIMARS interdiction to keep any of the immediate counterattack reinforcements from being able to get in. So they isolate, they penetrate through the surfaces and gaps, and then they just like fan out. But the first thing they did was they took down the comms and the command and control and took away their eyes. So that enabled them to do the penetration. And if you look on the left-hand side, you can see they also did a feint over there, just a little bit more of a deception, make it a little bit harder for the enemy to figure out what's going on. And then they did exploitation and consolidation. So I can't remember who it was this morning. Was it you, Bob, that was talking about exploitation? Yeah. So there you go. So that's exactly what they did. They fanned out, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later on. And so one of the things about the Ukrainian command and control system is, I think everybody knows, is it's Starlink based. It's space based. Because that's the way that they can be spread out all over the place and have reasonably secure comms. And they basically run everything off of their phones. You know, they have all these little apps, and they basically fight off of what they call the Ukrainian Tactical Network. They just fight off of their phones, which are all connected to space. Bad news, because we have talked Elon Musk into not allowing Starlink coverage in Russia. So that meant as soon as they went across, they wouldn't have any coverage. So they had to drop back to mission command, which again is one of the big components of maneuver warfare. So they had to power down and allow mission command by their company commanders in particular to be able to spread out. And then they consolidated around this this 1,000 square kilometer area that they wanted to hold. And they already had planned on immediately transitioning to the defense. And so they did that. You know, basically that's what happened. And it's a great example of maneuver warfare because there was a main effort, which was to, you know, break through and be able to get you to where you wanted to be, what in maneuver warfare we call a Schwerpunkt. There was surfaces and gaps, find the gaps. And the gaps weren't just physical, although that was part of it, but there's also an area where the command and control actually was underneath the FSB. You know, they're kind of a combination of FBI, CIA, you know, bad guy kind of guys, but not exactly the world's greatest war fighters. So there was a gap there. And then also there was, because they can't use their conscripts, their basic, you know, trainee first-term soldiers by law, they cannot go fight in a different country. So a lot of them were there also. So it's an area where you had basically untrained troops. So surfaces and gaps is not just physical, but it's also that physical, mental, moral as we go back to that. All right, so because they didn't have the ability to use their Starlink and everything, and they had to go with mission command, they had to use what, again, John Boyd calls the organic design for command and control. And this is not one of his better known pieces. What everybody knows is the OODA loop and the indirect approach and his patterns of conflict. But the organic design for command and control says that command and control provides those things that you see up there. And that's different than what we call command and control. It's the insight, it's the vision, it's focus and direction, so that when somebody's executing mission command, they know why they're doing it and what they're doing. Now, how do you be able to do that? In order to be able to do that, you got to do a couple things. One is you have to be able to, what we would say is understand, visualize, describe. So you've got to understand. You understand by seeing and through pattern recognition, through over and over again being able to see and understand what's in front of you at that lowest tactical level. And then be able to visualize, okay, what does that mean and what can I do? What are my opportunities and how do I do that? And if you're able to do that, you get that harmony because everybody's operating off of the vision. And they had that very much, even though you had these individual companies and platoons that are just all scattered all over Russia as they're moving out. They're all moving out with the purpose of the same vision of what they're trying to accomplish. Now, when we go to that, that pattern recognition piece is called natural decision making. And so a guy named Gary Klein developed this idea. There's a link in there which you guys have, but there's lots of YouTube videos and stuff. And so he developed what's called recognition prime decision making. And the idea is if you see things over and over and over again, then you know what to do automatically. And he used the example of a fire chief. You know, the fire chief shows up, and the fire chief has seen 100 fires of houses. And they can just look at the fire and go, okay, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, so I need to do this. And it's the same way with, you know, senior military leaders. They've seen enough fights that they can look at it and they can say, I kind of know what's going to happen, and I kind of know which direction do I need to be shifting my reserve because I think this is going to happen. Now, the people that take that to a T is the OPFOR at JRTC or NTC. Why? because they fought that same fight over and over and over and over and over again. So they use what's called decision point tactics. And decision point tactics is based on pattern recognition. I see the blue 4, the rotating training unit, do this, and therefore I automatically know this is what I need to be able to do. And so there's a link there to decision point tactics also, which, oh, by the way, the Op4 is updating it and rewriting it, and hopefully they'll have it out soon. But so what does this all mean? Is that the organic design for command and control requires an appreciation, and appreciation is your ability to see and understand, but then the leadership to be able to carry that out, which is different than the idea of command and control, but absolutely necessary. Because if we go all the way back to that electronic warfare and the primacy of it, the conditions of the war fight that we're going to be in is not that denied, degraded, disrupted is something that happens occasionally. It's something that happens all the time. So if you're a brigade in Ukraine on the front line, the battalion on the left right now is just disrupted. So they've got intermittent comms, it's kind of out there. The guys in the middle who are getting just the hell jammed out of them because they're being attacked, it is denied. They cannot talk at all. And then the guys over here on the right, maybe their fires are degraded, but the rest of it's okay. But then 2 or 3 hours later, it'll be different. But the point is, what we think of as normal, which is our comms are all up, almost never happens. It's the normal is denied, degraded, disrupted. And so what that means is if you don't have mission command, if you don't have this organic command and control, where people just naturally can see what's in front of them and know what to do, if they're waiting for orders, those orders are never coming. So now, how do you get that? So one of the ways you get that is you have to have harmony. You know, again, Boyd talks about harmony. Where does harmony come from? Trust. Okay, the Canadian brigadier talked about trust, right, and how important trust is. And you have to develop trust. But it also comes from implicit communication. Not explicit, where I tell you what to do, but implicit, where you're figuring out what to do based on, hey, my commander and I have talked this fight a whole bunch of times. So how do you get that? Part of it is through SOPs, a common SOP all the way across your organization. Common doctrinal language, everybody knowing that these are the 4 defeat mechanisms. And if I say isolate, it means this. If I say disintegrate, it means this. And so, et cetera. And then training, obviously, but probably most important is leader development. So how do we develop leaders? So war games is one. Simulations, you're getting ready to do a CPX. So the key is, though, you want to have reps. You need to do it over and over and over and over again. So map problems. Map problems are absolutely a great way to do it. So you can take a map like this, and this map happens to have a river running through it, and you can say, hey, let's talk about how our battalion is going to do a wet gap crossing, or our brigade, or whatever. Let's all talk about it. I want everybody to take this, draw it out yourself, and then we'll talk about it. Then you come back 2 or 3 days later, turn the map around, and you go, hey, let's talk about a wet gap crossing, because it's an entirely different crossing if you're coming from the other side of the river, right? Or how do we attack if there's a river in the middle of our zone, et cetera. But then you also look at it, it's got some nice little wooded areas, so you can talk about, mounted, dismounted, and dismounted avenue approach versus mounted avenue approach. It's got some built-up areas and all the rest of that. Map problems are easy, they're quick, and you get reps over and over and over and over again. So that's one way to do it. So another way to do it is tactical decision exercises. And I sent y'all one, but here's another. This is relatively short, little situation right there. You got a map overlay, and I even threw in a satellite image. And I got the digits for it also. But quick decision exercise, give it to everybody, say you got 15 minutes to figure it out. Now let's talk about it. Oh, by the way, if you do it someplace that you can actually go to, you can do it right out here. You can go walk the terrain on it. So it's a twofer. It's not only a tactical decision exercise, you can turn it into a terrain walk or a two. So that's another way to get reps. So I'll give you those. Then one of the other ones. Every company commander, probably platoon leader too, should have in their cargo pocket a set of little miniatures, right? So I've got these. You could have them in a Ziploc bag. And so you're in the motor pool. You got an extra 10 minutes to say, hey, let's talk about how we're going to attack a fortified position. And so you draw your little hill here with a fortified position, draw a little woods right here, maybe a little built-up area right here with a road going through it, something like that. Then you pull out your miniatures, right? Again, Bradleys, but imagine they were strikers. We got a mental problem here with at Fort Leavenworth. And you draw these things, you put these things out, and got some little dismounts here for the woods, and got the enemy. So you put the enemy out, right? Put your dismounts out here. Now you can talk about, hey, where's the surfaces? Where's the gaps? Where's, how might we approach this? How might we use deception or surprise, etc.? Move it around. You can do it in 10 minutes while you're in the motor pool, or 5 minutes, or something else, or anytime. Maybe right after boarding formation, you say, hey, all leaders, come to me. Let's look at this. Get done. Please small up. Throw them in your little box there, or your plastic bag. Carry them around in your cargo pocket. Good to go. You need reps, 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 reps. If you want to have leaders who can execute mission command, who can do maneuver warfare, etc., you have to have all of these reps. And there's all sorts of different ways to do it. You have to do it over and over and over and over and over again. And, everybody is always pressed for time. So all of these things are all short. They're short, but you get this time we're talking about an assembly area. This time we're talking about a wet gap crossing. This time we're talking about air defense, whatever it happens to be, and you just do it over and over and over again. After a while, everybody's thinking the same way, and that's what you need if you're going to do organic design for command and control. How am I doing time-wise? Okay. All right. So kind of the last thing I want to talk about is mind, time, space. If you want to win in maneuver warfare, you have to get into the enemy's mind, and you have to dominate time and space. You have to make time work for you so that you control the tempo, and they're on the reverse side of that. And you have to make space work for you. And when I say space, I mean not just physical space, but again, the cognitive space, that C2 space, and the moral space. And you have to dominate that. And for the enemy, you have to elongate their space. You have to make the space overwhelming for them. You have to make that time differential overwhelming for them so that you're getting inside of their mind and you're winning the fight. So, this is how the Ukrainians did this going back to Kursk. Again, all of that deception stuff that they did up front. Well, what happens when they attack and it just paralyzes the Russians? And so for the first 3 or 4 days, if you go back and you read the reports, Putin's like, first he puts the FSB guy in charge and he goes, okay, that's not going to work. Then he puts the Rosguardia guy in charge and he goes, that's not going to work. And then finally they, create another combined arms army, which, they do in like 10 minutes and just put that guy in charge. But they're paralyzed. They're paralyzed, like command and control wise. So then what's the next thing that happens is that because they're using deception, the Russians are confused on where exactly are they? Where in this space are they? And everything's moving so fast that they can't adapt quick enough. And then the electronic warfare that I talked about, they created this cloud of electronic warfare that is then, again, disrupting their ability to make sense of what's going on. And so the whole idea of all this is to attack physically, mentally, morally at the same time and just keep expanding it out so that the space that they have to deal with is more and more and more, that they're more time compressed so they don't have time, they feel like they're making mistakes, et cetera. And so you're basically just taking them, you're looking at them as a system, you're just pulling that system apart so it doesn't work anymore. And that's what the Ukrainians did. And so then if you follow on how they continued to do that, so again, our lucky strikers here. Why are strikers there? Because they're so fast. Now, this particular part of the country in August, because of the rains and stuff, it's very, very muddy. So most everybody's road bound. Who works great on roads? Strikers. And so the strikers are going from town to town to town to town. And so as fast as the Russians get a report that they're in this town, they're already in another town. So in that mind time space, the Russians are always behind, right? And then they're in the next town, then they're in the next town, then they're in the next town. And they're just expanding out like this. And so in the middle picture there, you can see it. These different routes that they're going on. And again, going back to the idea of surfaces and gaps, the surfaces and gaps aren't just for that initial attack, but for everything you do, you continually look for the surface. If you're one of these platoons, Ukrainian striker platoon, and you hear that there's Russians in this town right here, but your job is to get as deep as you can. You just go around it and bypass it and ignore it. You find the gap and go around it. And then the last thing was just the isolation that they did with their HIMARS, et cetera, isolating the space so that they dominate the space. And it's okay that the Russians dominate the space outside of that, because then we're going to go there in the first place anyway. So you want to get into this mind-time space, and you want to completely dominate it in order to be able to win that fight there. Now, the last caveat of that is that it's been 6 months since then, and we know that attack culminated, but deliberately so. They didn't want to outrun their logistics or outrun their fires. Back to the Clint Eastwood thing of a man's got to know his limitations. They knew their limitations, and so they said, we're going to grab this space right here, and then we're going to hold on to it. And they're still holding on to it. It's shrunk down a little bit. So none of this is to suggest that just because you do maneuver warfare, you're going to win the war. That's not necessarily true at all. But because you do maneuver warfare, you can win the fight, and you can win this operation. And I think that if you look at Kursk, it's a great example of the application of the principles of maneuver warfare, the things that Boyd and Lind suggested, the things that Bob Leonard talked about this morning and that he's written about. And this is a great example of maneuver warfare in action. And it's something that I think we can learn from, because our job is to learn from history and take what we learn and be able to say, okay, hey, we can do this too. The next time we'll try this. And with that, I don't know how much time we have for questions or anything, but I'm done. I didn't do your oral comps, did I?
You did not, sir, no.
Okay, good. I just want to make sure that this wasn't like revenge or something, revenge question.
Roger that, sir. Sir, I have a question for you in regards to live fires. Sir, as we all know in the profession, a large portion of our training is spent doing live fires. The personal pet peeve I have of live fires is that they don't train decision-making, they don't train initiative or mission command, and we don't usually practice them in that degraded environment, sir. So what are your thoughts about how do we practice mission command inside the constraints of the live fire, or how do we change our live fires so they stop being a rehearsed high school play and start being something that builds the maneuver warfare culture, sir?
No, I think it's a really good question. I think there's two components to that question. And the first component, and it's just a practical one, is you have to be trained to a certain standard before you can do the other stuff. If you think about, say, tank crew proficiency or tank platoon proficiency, let's say table 12, can you add a UAS into table 12? Sure. Can you add electronic warfare into table 12? Sure. Can you, have them have to do counter UAS while they're doing table 12? Sure. All of those things are absolutely true. But I think you have to be proficient at the basic blocking and tackling, the gunnery piece of Table 12 first, in terms of the, platoon fire commands and distribution of fires and all the rest of that. The same thing is true if you go up to company, et cetera. The challenge for our Army right now with the op tempo and everything is getting that base level proficiency to be able to do the other things. And so I think if you want to do and I've seen this before, I mean, if you go back to the Cold War when, we were lieutenants and captains, we did have very complex company live fires and battalion and brigade. I mean, brigade at the NTC had like everything you could possibly imagine in there. Why? Because we left as trained battalions, left home station as trained battalions. Nowadays, leaving home station with trained platoons is a good deal. So I think we have to figure out how do we get better at the basics, and then we add in the other stuff. But having said that, CFXs, where you just have the leaders out there, and it's still a live fire, is a better opportunity to be able to start to put some of those complexities into the fight and make it a little bit more realistic. And so can it be done? Yes, but I think you have to get the basics down first, just from a practical standpoint.
I'm going to take the last question. So, when we were working together, I remember you talking about operating, you didn't have a lot of funding. The budget was tight. And I remember,
Right.
I just wondered we're going to face probably that, and we always talk about that in my formation, right? Lack of money and all that. And I was hoping you could share kind of what you did in that time.
Yeah, no, that's great. So when I was a lieutenant, and the oil embargo happened, where the Middle Easterners said we're not selling any oil to the United States, and at the time we didn't have much production of our own, and so we had no fuel for a whole quarter. I mean, like none whatsoever. And I was in an armor brigade, so what do you do? Well, so we started to get innovative. And so we went to the golf course and we borrowed the golf carts, those little flag things, and you take 4 golf carts and now you have a tank platoon, and you could practice doing, bounding overwatch and distribution and occupation of a position and all the rest of that. And the interesting thing was, again, back to reps, because this giant tank that would throw a track and then you'd spend the next 6 hours putting the track back on. We actually got more reps at doing that stuff. So my platoon got very proficient at communications and at our battle drills and things like that. So when we did get our tanks back, we were actually better off. So that was one of the things we did. And another thing we did was, going back to this leader development piece, was we had more time for leader development. So my battalion commander, who was fanatic about leader development, he held lots and lots of LPDs on various things. And we did a lot of TOOTS, tactical exercises without troops, because, we couldn't drive anything anywhere. And so we learned so much about our profession in a way because we weren't hamstrung by having to take care of our vehicles and move them around and refuel them and do the maintenance. One of the great things is if you don't drive your tanks, you don't have to maintain your tanks either. So that meant every Monday for us that was, motor pool day, we weren't doing motor pool stuff because the tank hadn't gone anywhere. So that's a whole day's worth of training that you can now invest in something else. So, I think that, it's back to, there's this thing about, now that we have no money, we have to think. And, that was very true, because we didn't have any fuel and we couldn't drive. We had to get creative. We were forced to get creative. And, certainly every unit is suffering for resources to some way, shape, or form, and that could get worse in the next couple of years, depending on how things are going. And we'll just have to get more creative. And I think, in a way, that's a plus, because things I learned back then, I applied the rest of my career, but I learned them only because we didn't have any fuel. So.